I'm a badass woman.
Alright guys and dolls, today's review, which is The Woman Who Rides Like a Man by Tamora Pierce, is going to be short, or at least as short as a long-winded person like me can make it. Thankfully, it's a short book, but as I said, I'm long-winded, and this has already gone on long enough. I don't particularly feel well, so hopefully that will aid things along. This is the third book in the Alanna, or the Song of the Lioness Quartet. If you have kept up, you know I was saddened by the first book, but before I get into that, don't read the audiobooks. Just don't do it. Like, you will never want to read this series by the audiobooks alone. I've loved this series for 2 decades. It has been around for longer than that, and I think the problem is she has so much more world building to do. So Alanna, the first one, was not what I remember it being. The second one, In the Hand of the Goddess, was better. And then this one was even better than that. And I think in part because Alanna stays in one location for the majority of the novel, and it doesn't skip along time periods the way the first two do. The first two cover 7 years in the span of 2 of these. Not much time at all. So I think that was the biggest detriment to those two, was that she simply did not have enough time to do everything that needed to be done. In The Woman Who Rides Like a Man, Alanna has been knighted. She's also been outed because she had been posing as a boy as she earned her shield. She has killed Duke Roger in the last book, and her whole plan had always been, get my shield, I'm going to be a wandering knight. Obviously, she's going to reveal she's a female, she does feel like that is what she's going to have to do anyways, because she doesn't think that people are going to accept her. It's been at least 100 years since the last female knight. You do see female, or at least one female knight in the Beckett Cooper series, but it's just not socially acceptable. She has followed through on that plan and has found herself in the desert. She is then taken in by a Badger tribe called the Bloody Hawk. The Badger are very old school. They have these notions about men's places and women's places, and nobody more so than their current shaman. And so he does his best to get rid of Alanna, be it by running her out of town or by simply killing her. While she is there, she befriends these 3 outcasts who are outcasts because of the current shaman, whose name I cannot pronounce, so we're not even going to try. But it's Kara, Kuram, and Ishak. They are outcasts because the current shaman, because they can do magic, and this is something I don't understand. In order to be shaman, he has to pass the test of shaman. In order to do that, he has to have some grasp of magic, but he doesn't really have a good grasp of magic. It's really rudimentary. So I was confused because of the rite of the shaman that Alanna had to go through in order to become the shaman. He doesn't like magic, or he doesn't like that they can do magic, so he declares them basically evil and they become outcasts. But Alanna takes them under her wing, and Ishak is the one who has the most handle on his magic. This, of anything, I think is where the book could have used more, because Pierce really speeds through this whole deal with Ishak, where along with the way that men in the Badger tribe think, he thinks that he is better than his female counterparts, and he's really cocky. And so he is like, well, why don't you teach me more? Which I've gotten ahead of myself by, let's say, as I mentioned, the shaman wants to get rid of Alanna. The beginning of the book opens with her and her manservant Coram being attacked by these hillmen. The Bloody Hawk tribe come to her rescue, but one of the hillmen had this crystal sword. It turns out that it was a sword created by Duke Roger, and it is magic. So at some point, this shaman goes and retrieves the sword from the desert. The sword is evil, basically because kind of where it's rooted in, which is Duke Roger, but also it feeds into people's darker nature, and so the more that they succumb to its desire to kill, and the more that they feed into that darker side, the more evil it becomes. And if you don't have a good grasp on magic, then it can kill you. That's what happens, is the shaman tries to kill Alanna with this sword by channeling its magic, and it ends up draining him of his life force because he's not very good with magic. She now claims this sword. Her sword, Moonlight, not Moonlight, Moonlight's her horse. Her sword, Lightning, had been sheared off at the hilt by this crystal sword while she's fighting the Hillman. Now she's just trying to figure out what to do, but in the meantime, she's going to master this crystal sword. Eshak is like, well, I want to use your sword. You do not use half of your magic, half of your power. Why don't you let me have this sword? Why don't you teach me? Because you don't want to use it. So he just gets kind of power hungry. And this is what I'm saying by we needed more development at this point, because he has like 2 or 3 hissy fits. She puts him in his place. Something happens, and I think they were attacked by some hillmen. She and the 3 shamans, now she's shaman, so she can take them under her wing. Before the shaman had died, she was not allowed to teach them magic, but now that she is shaman, because she essentially killed him by battling with him. So even though she didn't kill him, he basically killed himself. They were battling against each other when he tried to kill her with the sword, blah, blah, blah. So she became shaman, and now that she's shaman, she can teach these 3 to be shaman in her place, because her whole thing was, I just want to be a traveling knight. The hillmen attack the village. She and Kara, Kurum, and Eshak ward them off along with the remaining villagers, and then she overexerts herself, essentially. She is then woken by somebody saying, hey, Eshak took your sword. She goes and she tries to save him, but he essentially burns himself up by trying to wield this sword when he doesn't have a good enough grasp on magic. So it needed more. It was really sudden. He lacked development. The whole situation lacked development. Like, from the beginning of, I'm your teacher, even though I don't like magic and I refuse to teach anybody how to use magic, and then now I have to, which it's a really good plot point. Like, it's a really good character development for her, where she's thrust into situations that she has essentially sworn off. But it's such a short book that Pierce is essentially forced to jump from situation to situation without giving it proper time to develop. So I thought we could have used more. I needed to see her battling, like a battle of wills with Eshak. I needed to see her go through more with the girls, because you get the sense that even though they are more timid, they are the more sensible of the trio. Like, there's Eshak is just going to get himself into trouble, but we needed more than just, well, he's a guy and he thinks like guys do, and so he's going to be impulsive and he's going to go against your wishes and he's going to essentially kill himself. Like, I didn't think we spanned that bridge from when he had hissy fit and then he apologized and he recognized the error of his ways, and that Alanna knew what she was doing, to all of a sudden he's like, well, I'm just going to grab that sword anyways. So Eshak has died. Now it's just Kara and Kurum, and Alanna is battling the old habit of, like, women are not allowed to be part of men's affairs. But Kara and Kurum, as the new shaman or the potential shaman for the Bloody Hawk, have to be involved in certain things. So that's something that Pierce does, and I don't think I've mentioned that. She is very much an advocate for women's rights in these books, and I enjoy it. Sometimes I wish it were integrated a little bit more seamlessly and subtly. You could obviously tell that she is trying to push certain agendas, which I don't particularly care for. I think subtlety is the way to go, especially in a fantasy series for middle grade. But I do like that in the way she approaches situations. She is challenging that antiquated notion of what a woman's place is. So Alanna has her little chicks under her wings, and then this was again something that I thought needed a little bit more. These shaman from other tribes start showing up, and by no effort of her own, she has essentially started this school of learning for shaman to come together and to learn and to share knowledge. And I was just like, I get it. She is unique. She is doing something in the Bloody Hawk that has never been done before. But the Bloody Hawk is so resistant to her. I am surprised that shaman from other tribes would just be like, yeah, we're gonna go there and we're gonna learn from her and we're gonna share knowledge. It didn't quite make sense within the buildup of what we had learned of the Badger and just how this community works. But on or in line with this, the voice of the tribes shows up, and he is somebody that we had met in the Alanna book when Alanna and Prince Jonathan had gone to the capital city of Persepolis, which is the capital city of the Badger, and then she and he had eventually gone and fought and defeated the Sander. But there was this Badger there named Ali Mukhtab, and he turns out to be the voice of the tribes. I don't quite know what to equate him to, but he is kind of the centralized figure of the entire Badger Nation. And every night they will commune, and he is the conduit of everything. So he knows the thoughts and feelings and just the inner workings of every Badger in this entire Badger Nation. He shows up and he's like, oh, nice to meet you again. I'm dying. I need Prince Jonathan to come because he needs to be the next voice of the tribes. Alanna and Jonathan have been carrying on a love affair, which I still don't quite understand, especially because, here's a bit of a spoiler. He shows up, he's like, I want you to marry me. She's like, I don't think I want to marry you because that would not allow me to do what I want to do. That would be extremely restrictive. I'm essentially a progressive woman, and the expectations of being your wife are going to box me in. So I don't know if I want to do it, but I love you. So, like, give me a moment to think about it. They end up getting into a fight because he assumes, and sort of rightfully so, the way that they carry on, that she's gonna say yes. She gets mad. Where was I going with this? I know where I was going with this. They get into this fight. Essentially, they break up, and he goes back. I've complained about this before, where Pierce, I don't quite know what voice she is writing in. It's definitely third person, but is it third person close? Is it omniscient? Like, I don't quite know, but she'll do these short little intervals from other people's perspectives, like she'll head hop. But so we get this really short moment where they've broken up, he has gone home, and like the first girl his parents introduced him to, he's like, yes, I'm gonna show that woman, I don't need her. And I was just like, we did not need this, because we essentially got that from Alanna's perspective later on in the novel. But while they're fighting, she says, I know that you've had affairs with other women while we were together. And then there's also a point when he asks her to marry him, and she's like, oh, but you should marry a virgin. And I was like, if this was so important to you, why did you start sleeping with him? Like, some of the angles that Pierce came out for this relationship didn't quite make sense. They didn't add up. They weren't, there was no continuity to the train of thought. Of course, Jonathan is like, oh, well, you were a virgin when we first started sleeping together. And I was just, I didn't understand where this line of conversation came from or where it was going, except to allow Alanna a reason to say no. Jonathan shows up. He is the prince of the King of the North, and the whole reason that Ali Mukhtab wants him to be the voice is because they are warring nations, and Ali Mukhtab is like, we need to be united. We have lost too many warriors to them, and they have lost too many warriors to us. Obviously, the Bashir do not accept this. They're like, we do not want to serve the king of the north. But Jonathan spends an X amount of time studying and learning to become the voice of the tribes, and then Alanna is spending more and more time healing Ali Mukhtab, keeping him alive, which again, can I just say, well, not again, let me just say, I didn't care for some of Pierce's writing style, because sometimes she would refer to him as Ali Mukhtab, and sometimes she would refer to him as the voice. And it sounded a little pretentious at times when we didn't need certain monikers. Anyways, they do get to the point where Jonathan has to take the right to become the voice of the tribes. Ali Mukhtab ends up dying, and Jonathan does pass this test. And this is the point where Alanna learns that he's leaving the next day, which angers her because she's like, he didn't even tell me this. He had been kind of testy lately as well, and she's realizing she thinks he's a little bit spoiled, and she doesn't particularly like him. And then she approaches him because not only is he leaving, and he never told her, but he's having her stuff ready for her to leave with him. And she's like, we didn't discuss this. And he says, well, I thought you knew. The only reason I was able to stay this long was because Miles, who was their teacher, he is a drunkard knight, so he doesn't actually do much as a knight, but he's apparently extremely wealthy, extremely influential, and he decides to adopt Alanna. So now she's Alanna of Trebont and Olau. A lot went on there too, where I was just like, whoa, what, like, why are we getting all this backstory about him when it doesn't necessarily serve a purpose? Like, I don't need to know that he's wealthier than we thought he was. It just served to say that Alanna would not have to worry about money as a traveling knight, because as his heir, he would take care of her. And it did catch me off guard because, yeah, you see that they have a close relationship. But it threw me off when all of a sudden some people are like, oh yeah, how's your dad? And I'm like, her dad died. I'm like, oh, they mean Miles. So it went from like, we are familiar to like, we're really familiar. I didn't like the way they started to refer to each other because we didn't have that development. Anyways, so Jonathan and Miles go back. Jonathan starts hanging out with Princess Josiane. And then Alanna decides, I'm kind of restless. Like, let's go see George, who is now in another city kind of taking care of business because there are some uprisings and people have forgotten their places. They start canoodling. He has always had this thing for her, which I accept him more than I accept Jonathan, because I mentioned in my last review, I did not understand why he was attracted to Alanna. I get it, like, they have a friendship and you can be attracted to your friends because you know them, but I was not convinced that there was a point where he saw her as more than a friend. She and George, I did buy, but at the same time, he felt like a rebound, and maybe he's supposed to be a rebound, but because he's George, I wanted him to mean more to her than that. What she particularly likes about him is the fact that he treats her like a woman, like something precious and something to be taken care of, which is not how Jonathan treated her, which I don't understand why she felt like she was in love with Jonathan, except that maybe he was her first love in a sense. Anyways, there is an instance in which somebody tries to poison George. The maid ends up dying. So Alanna goes to the cook and she's like, did you get papers from this maid, from anybody vouching for her so that it'd be okay for her to serve George? The cook's like, of course. Hands over this piece of paper signed by this guy named Claw. George decides to come back to Chorus in order to check out this guy, and he is subsequently attacked, which you get the sense that it's orchestrated by Claw. He's able to fend them off. He goes to his mother's house, which, let me jump back a second, over Halloween or All Hallows, Tom, who is Alanna's brother, who's an extremely powerful sorcerer, is doing something. He's been really secretive in his whatever he's doing at the palace. He's not really communicative with her, but she gets a feeling that there's great power in the air. Something's happening. He ends up taking her magic, borrowing her magic for whatever experiment that he's working on. I wished, because Alanna is supposed to be extremely magically powerful, I wish we had delved more into her capabilities. I understand that she's afraid of magic, but by this point, you get the sense that she's very good when she does use magic. But he tells her, oh, I'm sorry, but I know you use very little of your magic. And so the fact that she tires herself out, I didn't think that a lot of things were aligning with what Pierce would say or how Pierce would describe Alanna's magical capabilities. But anyways, so yes, Tom has done something. He had put up these magical barriers so that people couldn't, I guess, tap into what he was doing. Not quite clear, but George's mother had tried to kind of tap into him for some reason, and this greatly ailed her. And so he shows up at her house, and he's like, something's not right. Turns out she is still recovering from whatever she had tried to do. He goes off to check out Claw. He notices that Claw is like kind of taken his place. He approaches Claw, and Claw like backs off. George is like, who is this guy? Because he speaks like a noble. Where did he come from? We don't know who he is yet, but he does call Miles over, and Miles is like, let me do some digging. Alanna, meanwhile, is back with the Badger. She is sent by their chief to go check in on a friend of his. She goes off and she rescues this woman who is being tied to a stake by the people of the tribe that she's part of because they'd had a hard winter. Things were just going wrong. And this other traveling like shaman type guy is like, oh, well, my God says that if you get rid of your sorcerer or your sorceress, everything will improve. So they rescue her before she's able to be killed. She still ends up dying from her injuries, but not before she hands over this top secret letter that Alanna needs to deliver to Halef Saif from the Bloody Hawk. And this is where we leave off. There are foreshadowing moments about Duke Roger. Alanna has some bad dreams and nightmares and visions. So we know where it's heading in the next book, which if you're putting pieces together, you kind of understand maybe what Tom was doing. I wanted more of Tom. Like, he is so important to Alanna, and he is so powerful. I wish throughout this series we had seen more of him, but again, small book, we're not getting much. She is able to repair her sword because the sorceress, before she dies, she tells her how to repair it. So she essentially combines the crystal sword with her sword. That is The Woman Who Rides Like a Man. On the whole, I enjoyed it. It took me forever, only because I did not have time to read it, but I was not about to put myself through the pain and suffering that is listening to the audiobook. So there you go. We'll move on to Lioness Rampant tomorrow.